much, Alice. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. It's been a while since I've done some online teachings like this, so we'll work through this together. Um, and I have to give a warning up top. Where I live, my internet has been up and down, up and down. So if I disappear, I'll come back. I promise. But it may happen. So we'll just have to roll with the punches and get through this together. Um, as we begin today, let's take a moment to create a sacred space for ourselves. So, whatever we've been doing throughout the day, any of our worldly concerns, whatever running around we've had to do, however we have been enjoying our Saturday, let's put all of that to the side and bring ourselves fully present to the place that we are, to this space together. Uh, we want to recognize that the space we're creating is a space for study, for practice, to engage with the teachings of the Buddha. So just take a moment, take a few deep breaths to allow whatever it is that has been going on in your day to be put aside and to really create a space for yourself, regardless of where you are. You can be in your living room, you can be on your kitchen table, you can be, if you have a gompa in your house, you can be there. It doesn't matter. It just matters that mentally and emotionally, you create a space that's dedicated to your engaging with the teachings of the Buddha and you're engaging with your own spiritual practice. And as we do that, let's set a strong motivation that the reason we're coming together this evening for the purpose of studying the teachings of the Buddha, specifically studying the mind training teachings of the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, the purpose isn't for our own benefit alone, but we are coming together so that we might be able to benefit others more fully. So our goal is to improve our minds in such a way that we develop more wisdom and more techniques, more skills, more capacity to be of service to others. And yes, we may find benefit for ourselves in the process, right? That's the hope, really. But the main goal should not be for our own happiness. It should not be for our own comfort, our own relaxation. The main goal should be for us to develop the technique to benefit others. And in the big picture, that means developing or achieving Buddhahood as quickly as possible. So, doing everything possible to progress on the path of the Bodhisattvas so that we might become Buddhas quickly and more quickly. So, everything we do is toward that end. So, we might be of service to others, not to ourselves alone. So, take a moment to set that strong motivation, that bodhicitta motivation. May my study of the text and my practice this evening, my joining in this community, this um, online teaching, be for the purpose not of my own benefit, but so that I may be of more benefit to others now and in the future. And with that, we'll offer a few prayers to begin. We will start with refuge and bodhicitta prayer, which we will do 3 times in Tibetan, then once in English, and then we'll continue with the other prayers on the screen in English. Sangye cheran soki chonam la janchu baru dagni kyasu chi dagi jin soki pe sonam gi drola penche sangye drupar shok. Sangye cheran soki chonam la janchu baru dagni kyapsu chi dagi jin soki pe sonam gi drola penche sangye drupar shok. Sangye chiran soki chonam la janchu pardo dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi drola penche sangye drupar shok. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness in the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain to the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. And now we'll offer a short mandala offering. And it's customary to make a mandala offering before a teaching. You make the offering to the teacher to request this particular teaching, and you also make it to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that they might give you their blessings. And so for the mandala offering, you're visualizing the entire world, all that exists, the entire universe, the entire multiverse, if you can picture that. And you picture it as a purified Buddha land, that there's no faults, there's nothing askew. And then that beautified, purified world, you offer that to all sentient beings on behalf of offering it to all Buddhas, right? And so we'll offer this twice, once in Tibetan and then once in English. Sashipiki Luixing Meto Tramrirabling Shi Ni Deng Pandi Sange Shindu Mikte Ai Joy Namadak Shingla Shipharjo. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. And finally, we'll offer praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean. To you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects. With supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, sea, condition things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. Great. Thank you. So I am very happy to continue this series. I'm very happy all of you could join me this evening to continue the series. Um, I'll say right at the top, I'm not good at like looking at the chat. So if you have questions at any time, feel free to interrupt. And I think if you kind of like click the button to raise a hand, I probably won't see it. So you can just, take your moment and unmute your mic and respectfully interrupt me, and that's okay. And if it's not a good time for questions, then I'll let you know and we can put it off to the end. I will have time at the end for a Q&A. But in the moment, feel free to ask questions as needed. So, as I'm thinking about this text specifically and the world as we're living in it right now, the question is, why is Lojong so important to us right now? I think all of us know what Lojong is, right? Mind training, the mind training technique of engaging in different types of analysis and meditative techniques that are all aimed at eliminating the self-cherishing mind, right? Eliminating the cause of all of our suffering, which is the mind that says, I'm more important than you. My happiness is more important than your happiness. So all of the Buddhist teachings are aimed at that same thing, right? All of the Buddhist teachings are aimed at eventually us realizing the nature of reality, combining that with a realization of bodhicitta, and then becoming bodhisattvas, and then practicing the bodhisattva path to become Buddhas. So as Buddhas, we be totally free from all samsara, and not only that, free from all the stains of samsara, and have the greatest capacity to help others. All of the Buddhist teachings are aiming towards that same goal. But my training specifically is taking the Buddhist teachings and really focusing on the self-cherishing mind and how insidious it is and how difficult it is to overcome it because it permeates so much of our everyday life. It permeates so much of everyday culture. And so these teachings are really powerful right now, I think. I mean, for me, they're kind of my favorite genre of Buddhist teaching and Buddhist meditation, right? In general, because my ego is so huge that anything I can do to kind of, bat it down is really helpful. So for me, it's one of my favorite types of, meditative technology, let's say. But right now, I think that it's a important time for all of us to be practicing mind training. And I think part of the reason is we're living in an attention economy. You know, self-cherishing has always been the um, cause of all of our suffering, right? Self-cherishing and self-grasping itself being the root of samsara. Those have always been the cause of our suffering. It's not to say the 21st century is uncommon in that way, okay? But the 21st century and internet and social media has really created a attention economy like I don't think, at least our world has seen before. Everything is about look at me. Everything we do, every interaction we have is about performing an idea of who we want to be, not because we feel that's a genuine version of ourselves, but because we feel that's the version of ourselves that will get the most likes online. Okay. And I don't mean to say that every one of you is like that, but in general, that's the culture we're in, right? That people are celebrities for being celebrities. Like They are famous because of they are willing to be famous and they want attention. And our whole life is about cultivating attention right now. And when you cultivate attention, the only way to do that is to focus on me. Look at me. Look at how special I am. Look at how smart I am. Look at how much better I am than that other person over there who's trying to capture your attention as well. So, with a culture that is so dedicated to increasing the self-cherishing mind, that is so dedicated to, taking the idea of the ego and saying this should be the center of your life. You should perform everything for others. You should always be in a state of like anxious performance to make sure that you are being viewed in the best possible light and that everyone is only complimenting you. And if not complimenting you, at least keeping you in mind, you know. You should always be at the forefront of other people's attention. So as long as we're taught that, and to be absent that kind of attention means we don't exist, right? It can be devastating for people. And we look at the effects of social media on young people today, and there are a number of studies, and there are continuing to be put out to show how devastating it can be, and it is for many, many young people and adults as well, that we see a loneliness epidemic that is going hand in hand with this performance attention seeking epidemic. And what you can realize by looking at this is that making sure everyone looks at you all the time, making sure you can always garner the most attention that you can perform for the world doesn't make you not lonely. It just means people are looking at you, but they aren't with you. They aren't in community with you. It actually increases your loneliness because all these people are staring at you, judging you, expecting you to perform for them, and you don't have any resources, emotional resources to navigate it in a healthy way. And even for those of us who aren't on social media, like I'm not on social media, I still feel that, right? I still feel that aspect of society that is about me, me, me. It's an attention society. That is the new currency, is how much attention you can get. And so, of course, self-cherishing is celebrated. Self-cherishing is idolized in this economy and in this society. And so because of that, those of us who are engaging in spiritual practice or trying to engage in spiritual practice, we have the tools to look at what is popular and look at everyday society and realize all it's doing is causing us more suffering. All it's doing is creating the conditions for us to be unhappy. And there are tools to overcome that. And one of the primary tools is engaging in mind training practice that is directly focused at eliminating our self-cherishing mind. And so, in my mind, I think these mind training practices are the perfect antidote for living in 21st century. And really, they are the perfect antidote for living in samsara in general, but especially now when our ability to nurture the self-cherishing mind is magnified and multiplied in ways that I don't think it has been in the past. Now, of course, you have the question, is there something inherently selfish about focusing on personal growth, especially amidst so much external turmoil, so much external suffering and chaos, whether it be war or the fast decline into authoritarian governments in Western countries or whatever it may be. There's so much violence, there's so much suffering external to ourselves, is that we have to ask the question, is there a selfishness if we're only focusing on ourselves and we're looking at our own mind to eliminate our own self-cherishing? Well, isn't that kind of antithetical to actually trying to serve others, but instead we're looking at ourselves? We're trying to eliminate our own self-cherishing. So instead of going out into the world and helping people, we're meditating and studying and doing these individual practices. And I think the truth is, those aren't mutually exclusive. Like, it's very easy to get into this trap that says, if I'm doing A, then I can't be doing B. And that's not true, right? If depending on our means, our circumstances, our environment, what tools we have available to us, there are many things we can do to help in a conventional way, to be of service to others in a conventional way. And that can be incorporated into our spiritual practice, which is a practice that is dedicated to eliminating our self-cherishing, that is dedicated to doing personal study and personal meditation and reflection, and using that as a way to empower our activism or whatever work we're doing outside of our own individual development, right? So I don't think the inner work that is necessary and is the most critical part of our practice is in any way contradictory to doing external work. I think, in fact, the inner work is what we need to do to empower the external work. The inner work gives us the tools of wisdom and compassion, and it gives us the foundation upon which we can engage in successful outer work. So I think that it's easy to get trapped in this mindset of, if I'm just meditating every day, if I'm just working on my own mind, especially if I'm trying to adopt a bodhicitta attitude, how is that actually doing that? How am I not just focusing on myself? Even though I say I'm doing this for the benefit of all sentient beings, aren't I really just doing this for me? Um, it's easy to get caught in that trap, and we can do that. It's easy to pay lip service to the, oh no, I'm improving my life so I can help others. Like it's easy to say that and not mean it. Um, I was at a teaching once with His Holiness Dalai Lama at Gyume Monastery, and it was almost entirely monks at this teaching. And he criticized the monks for saying, you all claim to be Mahayana practitioners, and yet instead of helping others, you are so focused on yourselves that it is shameful that our Christian brothers and sisters have food pantries and they have homeless shelters and they have all of these services where you don't have any of those things. It's very rare to see in India any Buddhist-led social activism services, right? Or in the West either, because you say, oh, that's conventional help. That's a worldly benefit. I'm trying to focus on otherworldly benefit. And that's true, but they're not mutually exclusive, right? If my goal is to eliminate all of your suffering or all sentient beings suffering entirely and to place them in the state of Buddhahood, that is the ultimate goal. But I can also, if I have the means available to me, help them in the here and now. Now, that doesn't just mean wildly, throwing cash out the window as I drive down the street. It means using my wisdom and my compassion hand in hand to see what resources I have to be of maximum benefit. And recognizing that any benefit I do in the immediate moment it may not be long-term benefit. It's definitely worldly benefit. But how can we expect people to engage in any sort of personal spiritual practice and develop any long-term benefit if they're hungry, if they don't have shelter, if they don't feel secure? How can we allow people to suffer needlessly if we have the means to ameliorate that, even knowing that ameliorating temporary suffering is only that, it's temporary. Even knowing that, if we have it in our power to do something about it, it's our responsibility as Mahayana practitioners to do it. So even though all of our discussion today is going to be focused on, or all of our discussion in mind training is focused on the self, on our personal practice rather, it's done with the intent to eliminate the self-cherishing mind so we can be of more service to others in this life and in the future lives as well. Eventually, with the goal of freeing them from all suffering and leading them to Buddhahood. So with that in mind, we are studying the Wheel of Sharp Weapons by Dhammarakshita. And I've already gone over the kind of authorship and so forth of this text. So I won't repeat all that, except to remind us that this is one of the oldest mind training texts we have. Probably the oldest. We don't have a date for it. But the mind training tradition really stems from Atisha, who traveled to Tibet and spent the last half of his life teaching in Tibet. And he brought with him this text that he had learned from Dhammarakshita. And if you look at the whole mind training tradition and all the texts on mind training, they come after Atisha, right? So Atisha being around 10th century, and this text and a few others being undated, but then all the other texts come from 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th century, and then jumping to contemporary masters as well, giving mind training teachings and instruction. And what's uncommon about this text is that it is really focused, especially in the first half, on karma and on recognizing how karma and the self-cherishing mind work hand in hand, and how understanding karma is a way to practice mind training. It is a means to practice the elimination of the self-cherishing mind. So what he's doing is he's directly connecting karma with mind training, which is uncommon. And the way he does that is he is, in these verses we're going to study today, at least some of them, he first gives an experience of suffering that we will have recognized in our lives. And he says, when you experience that suffering, what you need to do is recognize the cause of that suffering. And the cause of that suffering is a karmic action that you did in the past. Most likely not in this life, most likely in a previous lifetime, whether it be your past, single one past life or many, many past lives ago. So your experience of suffering in this life has a cause. That cause is a karmic action you created in the past or you performed in the past. And then the way to eliminate that karmic action so it doesn't happen again is to practice Tonglen, right? So Tonglen and mind training in general are the way to ensure that you don't recreate those karmic activities. So you don't recreate the conditions for future suffering. So Tonglen itself is a practice that comes from the mind training tradition, and it is a practice. Generally, Tonglen means giving and taking, and it's the idea of taking others' suffering and giving them your happiness. And this, of course, is a mental practice. We're not actually taking other people's suffering from them. If we could, then, if that was possible, then we'd all be Buddhas, right? The Buddha would have taken all of our suffering long ago. But what this is doing is it is trying to familiarize ourselves with the idea that since we live in samsara, the experience of suffering is a natural state. And therefore, instead of trying to avoid it, instead of engaging in activities that exacerbate it, we need to learn how to accept it for what it is and be willing to take other suffering as well. Because by having that willing mind, what we're doing is eliminating any capacity for our own self cherishing mind. There's no room to focus on the me, my, if I'm busy trying to bring about others' happiness, right? So we want to take their suffering and we want to give them our happiness. We develop this wish. And there are a number of different ways of doing this meditation. You can, different, different teachers will give you different instruction. It almost always involves visualizing the suffering of others in the form of either black smoke or black oil, or it's like a tarry substance. And as you inhale, you breathe that in through your body. And then that black smoke or tarry substance, you generally visualize it gathering at the center of your heart, which you visualize your self-cherishing mind as like a small steel ball that is being enveloped in this self-cherishing, this black smoke or this tar. And the more that this suffering from others in the form of black smoke, it covers the self-cherishing mind, it destroys it, right? It overpowers it, it crumbles it into nothingness. And then as you breathe out the brilliant white light of your own happiness. So you give your own happiness away, and that's absorbed into all sentient beings who are in the space in front of you. That's the general idea. And in general, they say mount giving and taking upon the breath. So the idea is as you breathe in, you take suffering, and as you breathe out, you give away happiness. But there are other versions of it as well. Many of them involve visualizing your guru or your teacher in the space above the crown of your head. And you often visualize their mind of bodhicitta, their mind of pure compassion, coming out and like elixir or nectar absorbed into the crown of your head, and that fueling your own mind of your own capacity to destroy self-cherishing. And then sometimes you might spend a long time just focusing on absorbing suffering and then spend a long time on giving away happiness. It's not always back and forth, you know? So there are a number of different ways to do this practice. And we won't be giving specific instruction in it today, but I know that they have done Tonglen instruction in some of the weekly meditation sessions that CKSL offers. And if there's interest in us including some Tonglen practice in one of our Saturday sessions, you can let us know and we'll find time to give more specific instruction with that as well. It also can be combined with practice of the four opponent powers. So practice that is to purify negative actions and negative karma. So if there's interest in that, we will do that. But if you're looking up different ways to practice Tonglen and you just look on your own online, you might find different instructions. And that's okay. They're not contradictory. It's just different techniques, different teachers, different lineages that are all pointing at the same thing. But sometimes the techniques are slightly different because as different students require different methods, right? Hmm. The important thing, at least in this text, is that we're recognizing that study, specifically the study of karma, gives us the capacity to understand our experience of suffering for what it is, right? Without study, then the suffering we have, we don't know where it comes from. And if we don't know where it comes from, then we don't feel like we have the capacity to ever be free from it. And that creates this negative feedback loop. So What study does is it prepares the mind for future practice. It Practice itself is like the moisture that brings study to life. So they work together. Our study prepares ourselves so we can practice in a meaningful way. And then when we do practice, what that does is it takes the dry words of our study and it brings them to life, right? So practice is the moisture that illuminates or causes our study to blossom in our minds. But study itself is needed there in order to have a ground upon which to practice. So they work together. And so the idea that we're too intellectual and studying philosophy isn't going to help me improve my mind is a wrong idea. It's the total wrong understanding. There are some Buddhist traditions or there are some teachers who say all you should do is focus on the emptiness of the sky or the primordial mind, and that's all you need to do. You don't need to study, you don't need books, you don't need to think about philosophy. You just need to meditate on nothingness. That's totally wrong, right? That's missing the point because you don't have anything to base your meditation on. You know, you need something that will serve as a substrate upon which you can begin to meditate. And then as you meditate, that feeds your knowledge and your experience. So experience and intellect work together. They become inseparable. That's the point of engaging in study like we're doing today. And then after we engage in this study, bringing it to your cushion and actively doing practices based on that study, right? So you have to incorporate experiential knowledge and intellect because both of them are critical for our development. So these verses we're going to study are all kind of pointing at one thing, right? Which is that all of our experiences of suffering come from karmic acts we've done in the past. And therefore, instead of repeating those karmic acts, we should do the opposite of them. We should do some sort of antidote and we should take on the suffering that we're experiencing as if it were other suffering and give away our happiness. Every verse between verses 9 and 48 of this text are more or less making that same point. However, what they're doing is they're highlighting different specific examples. And to some extent, these examples, it gets a little tedious, right? Going through all the verses because you say, okay, yeah, I get the point. I get it. I get it. I get it. But the purpose is to, one, inspire us, but also, maybe frighten us a little bit. And I don't mean frighten us as in like terrify us, but it's easy for me to say, whenever you experience suffering, recognize that suffering comes from karmic causes you created, and therefore it's an expected result of your actions, and therefore don't let it overwhelm your mind. It's easy to say that. But if I give you 40 different examples of types of suffering, the chances are within those examples, one of them you're going to connect to. One of them you're going to say, oh, wait, that's something that I feel. Or conversely, when we talk about the antidotes to all those types of suffering, you might say, wait, that is not something I do. I'm not interested in that. I do the opposite of that. So you might see in these different examples, these different specifics, your own activities that are leading towards your own suffering. So the reason he gives all of these different examples instead of just giving a vague overview is to make sure, A, that the point is really hammered home. Okay. He repeats that the point is repeated over and over again. But B, to connect to as many disciples as possible, to as many different minds as possible. So you may not see your own experience of suffering in certain verses, but in other verses might light up for you. And you say, that is what I feel all the time. So by giving all these examples, he's just broadening our experience. And again, the goal of this is to help our intellectual understanding and our experiential understanding come into some sort of union with each other so they're inseparable. So since all these verses are discussing karma, I think it's useful just to have a quick review of karma. Real quick review. So who would like to share what are the four most important qualities of karma, or the four characteristics of karma? I know someone knows. Anyone? Speak up. Okay.
I'm not sure, but I know it follows the cause and effect pattern.
That's right. So karma itself is cause and effect, but karma, we say, has four characteristics. Okay. So before I get to those, then, if we don't have any student jumping in, maybe I'll start a little bit differently. When we think about karma, karma is the law of cause and effect. right? All of our activities have consequences. Now, what's important especially in this Lojong mind training setting, but always to recognize with karma, karma does not mean we deserve to suffer. No one deserves to suffer. Now, if you engage in a harmful action and then you experience suffering as a result, that is the natural consequence of your action. It doesn't mean you deserve to suffer. So, karma is not about punishment. That is really important. And even in the mind training texts, which are very harsh in the way they talk about our own ineptitude with navigating our self cherishing mind, we're not meant to believe that we deserve to suffer. Okay, that's really, really important. We aren't meant to believe that we are being punished. The purpose of understanding karma and understanding that our suffering comes from our own actions is not so that we can feel like we're being punished, but instead to realize that if we're the ones causing our suffering, then we are also the ones that have the capacity for our own liberation. Because if it's my actions that are causing my suffering, then it's also my actions that will bring about the end to that suffering. It's not me being dependent on anything outside of myself. So karma is not self-flagellation. It's not beating ourselves up. It's not saying that we deserve to suffer because we hurt others or cause others harm. It's recognizing that when we engage in negative actions, the consequences of that is we experience suffering. Right. So that kind of very clinical. Every action has a cause. Every experience has a cause. That very clinical understanding is critical. Is important to remember when we're discussing karma, because otherwise we can get into this habit of saying I deserve this, or even worse than that, you deserve this. Those people who are impoverished deserve it because they engaged in the act of stealing in past lives. Therefore, they deserve their poverty. Therefore, I shouldn't do anything to help them, and it's okay for me to look down on them, right? Or those people that are sick engaged in harmful activities of the body in the past and caused pain to others. Therefore, they deserve to be sick, and therefore, I have some sort of moral superiority to them. It's not my responsibility to help them, even though I have the means to. It's very easy for karma to feel like that if we're not thinking about it clearly, to feel like we're blaming the victim, and we're not. So, karma and studying karma and being very direct about the link between our own actions and our experience of suffering. I think of it like ripping off a band aid, right? These aren't things we want to admit because there's going to be some pain involved. But by admitting them, then we are giving ourselves the tools to not repeat it. You know, it's like, a bucket of cold water, like a wake up call saying, look, this isn't coming from anything else. This is coming from you. All of your experience of suffering are coming from you. The external conditions you're in, sure, they are facilitating certain karma to ripen in one way or another. But the suffering itself, it comes from you. Even the external conditions on a larger scale are also due to your own karma. Where you were born, the environment you're born into, are due to karmas you've created. So all of this is the result of actions you created in the past, or actions you performed in the past, seeds you planted. All of this is the ripening of those seeds. So that is when you have that bucket of cold water dumped on you, what it allows you to do is be really clear about your actions right now. You know, understanding karma at the most intimate level is something only Buddhists can do. We can understand karma in a general sense, and we can understand that this type of action will have this type of result. But if I were to say, well, your specific experience of this type of suffering at this moment is due to this action you did in this past life, only a Buddha can see those direct connections for any individual experience, right? But we can talk about it in general. We can talk about the general idea of how karma works and how a specific type of action will have a specific type of result. So, engaging in this study helps us develop a conviction in karma. And by developing that conviction in karma, we can look at our lives right now and whatever experiences of pleasure or displeasure that we have and use that as a way to understand how our actions must have been in the past. We can't we can gauge our past actions by our current experience. And if we want to have an idea of what our future experiences are going to be, then we look at our current actions. So if we don't want to experience suffering in the future, then we have to look at our current actions right now. Am I engaging in the causes for suffering, or am I engaging in the causes for pleasure and happiness? Because those are the seeds that I'm planting at this moment that are going to ripen in future lives or even in this life as an experience of pleasure or an experience of suffering. So in order to determine our future happiness or our future suffering, what that will look like, we have to look at our current actions. And we can't do that if we don't understand how karma works and we don't understand what virtue is and what non-virtue is. So that's the important part of studying karma. We study it with a non-judgmental mind that doesn't say you're a bad person for engaging in harmful action. It doesn't come with any guilt. Instead, it comes with the recognition that this action has this result. Okay. So that is important to recognize about karma. Now, when we talk about karma, generally we say there are 4 important characteristics about karma that we should know. The first is that karma is definite. And what that means is you will never engage in a harmful action and have a pleasant or a pleasurable result. You will never engage in a virtuous action and have a negative result. Okay. When you plant apple seeds, you will never grow an orange tree or a mango tree. It's always going to be that a negative action has a result that is of suffering or a negative result. And a positive action is going to have a positive result, always, because karma is definite in that way. Now, any one of our given actions may be mixed. It might have some positive karma and some negative karma mixed together, right? So I'm not saying that every specific action is black and white in that way, but what the texts call black karma and white karma have black results and white results. That's definite. Then the second important characteristic of karma is that it's constantly increasing. So when we engage in any activity, no matter how small, the results can be much larger than the activity itself. And I think of this the same way that seeds are quite small. An acorn is this big, but it grows into an oak tree that is huge. So even though we may not think that the actions we're doing now are that serious, we may say, yeah, it's not virtuous, but it's just a small non-virtue. We might have that mindset, but that doesn't mean that the results are going to be equally small because karma is increasing. That's true for positive karma, and that's true for negative karma. And because of that, when we engage in negative karma, it is important to engage in future virtuous activities that help purify that negative karma, that stop it from increasing more and more and more. But for me, the important part of recognizing that karma has the capacity or the characteristic of being increasing is recognizing that nothing is too small. And that goes for both virtuous activity and non-virtuous activity. So if I'm thinking that there may be a virtuous activity I could do, but it's such a small thing, it's not going to make a big difference. Therefore, why should I even bother doing it? That mindset is totally wrong, because even the smallest of virtuous activity can have an outsized result. And then the flip side is that if I think, oh, this activity is maybe harmful, but only a little bit harmful, that is also totally wrong, because it can have an outsized result. So karma is definite. Karma increases. Karma is non-transferable. That's the third thing, which is to say that any action I do, I have to experience the results of it. You will never experience the results of actions I performed, and I will never experience the results of actions you performed. So in that way, this is the important part to remember, that all of your experiences are due to your own actions. They can't be others' actions. Now, it is true that when you engage in certain prayers, we can help modify the conditions to allow certain karmas to ripen, right? So you have to imagine that we've created countless karmic seeds. We've planted countless karmic seeds in past lives. And all of those seeds are waiting for the right condition to ripen. So some of those might ripen as a pleasurable experience. Some might ripen as an experience of suffering or a non-pleasurable experience. Now, the conditions that allow one seed to ripen versus another, those can be affected sometimes by people in our vicinity, by others who are praying for us, others who are engaging in virtuous action on our behalf. That can help affect our conditions a little bit that determine which of those karmic seeds is ripening. But we still have to experience the results of the seeds ourselves. Right? So karma is non-transferable. I can't give away my good karma, and I can't actually take away your bad karma, and vice versa. And then lastly, karma doesn't go away on its own, or it isn't destroyed on its own. There are ways to destroy karma, or by destroying it, what we mean is remove its capacity to develop. So a single moment of anger can destroy eons worth of virtuous karma you've accumulated. Just like taking seeds and putting them under a flame will cause them, you may not burn them up, but it will destroy their ability to grow, right? In the same way, a single moment of anger can destroy so many virtuous seeds we've created. And on the flip side, we can engage in different types of virtuous practice that destroy the capacity for negative karmas to grow. So even though we've done negative actions in this life and in past lives, we have the ability to limit their capacity to grow into these great, large experiences of suffering in the future. So those are the four important characteristics of karma that we have to keep in mind. That is definite, that it increases, that is non-transferable, and that it won't go away on its own. Okay. Those are important to remember because when we think of our experience of suffering in this life, our experience of suffering are due to karmic actions we already created or we already performed. So even though it's possible to um, destroy the capacity for negative karmas to ripen fully, we've created so many negative actions in the past that they're going to ripen. We're going to experience suffering. Why? Because we're samsaric beings. We live in samsara. Samsara has as its very nature being dissatisfied. That's the nature of samsara. Okay, um, we have these contaminated aggregates that we call a body that have as their very nature they're going to age, they're going to get sick, and they're going to die. We can't avoid that because we're samsaric beings. So coarse suffering, physical suffering, those are unavoidable to us, and those come about as a result of karmic actions we've done in the past that brought us to live in samsara in the moment and time and place that we are. We can't avoid that physical suffering, those external sufferings. What we can avoid is adding more suffering on top of it. We can avoid and we can eliminate the capacity to multiply our suffering by taking a physical suffering and adding mental suffering on top. So we have created these karmic causes for suffering in the past. And since we're samsaric beings, we're going to experience suffering in this life, but it doesn't have to overwhelm us. We don't have to let our physical suffering, especially, or other types of emotional suffering, define us. We can recognize that suffering, recognize the causes of that suffering, and instead of letting that suffering overwhelm us, use that suffering as an opportunity to engage in virtuous practice. And that is the point of this text specifically, using the suffering we experience to recognize it as a call to arms to prevent that from happening in the future. By the time that suffering is ripened on our body, we can't prevent it from happening in this life as it's ripening, but we can prevent allowing it to become a cause for future suffering. And we can prevent it from being a cause for emotional suffering and emotional distress, which only magnifies our experience of suffering. So, here, usually when you study karma, you study it hand in hand with the 10 virtuous activities and the 10 non virtuous activities. Because once you understand that every negative action has a negative result, you want to know what are those negative actions that I need to avoid. In this text, instead of studying it in relation to the 10 non virtues specifically, we are studying it with reference to the self cherishing mind. So, all of the different negative actions that we're going to see as causes for different types of suffering are all going to come from the self cherishing mind. They're different permutations or different aspects of the self cherishing mind. And again, that's because this is a mind training text. And the mind training text is like a magnifying glass that is capturing the sunlight and focusing it, into this single concentrated beam at our self cherishing. So, with that said, we can begin to look at this text. Are there any questions before we jump into the text about karma or about anything I've discussed so far? Okay.
Venerable, I have a
If not,
question.
sure.
Um, so you said, the karma does not go away on its own, we know that. So, but is there any measure of, all the virtuous actions that we can do and how it can prevent in the future, right? Or is it just very directional? Uh,
What I'm not quite sure I understand your question. What do you mean? Can you?
so, like you read the teachings or you meditate, you pray and you do all of these, right? Is there any measurement of how much that can help versus is it
I
just to
see. I
say,
see. I
hey,
see. I see.
hey,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
just the
So,
quantification.
well, actual quantification. we can't do, right? Only Buddhas can say these are the however many specific virtuous actions or virtuous seeds you planted and non-virtuous seeds you planted and so forth. That takes an omniscient mind to know like an actual number, right?
Mhm.
But what we can do is we can look at our own experience and we can see how we react to the suffering of samsara and compare it to how we used to react. And by that examination, we can see how our practice is going. And so, as an example, and I think I might have mentioned this last week even, um, when I was a young man before I found Buddhism, I was very angry all the time. I had a lot of anger, and I was overwhelmed by my anger quite often. I didn't even realize how angry I was, and I allowed that anger to make decisions for me. Okay, and then I found the Dharma, and without realizing it, the more I practiced, I let a lot of that anger go. That isn't to say I've overcome anger. I definitely haven't, but I realized how much more content I was, and how I wasn't allowing anger to be my first response, my default reaction. And so I could look at my experience and I could see if this same thing happened to me a few years ago, I wouldn't have reacted in the same way. I would have blown it out of proportion. I would have reacted in some harmful way that only would have made things worse. But instead, because of my practice, I'm able to experience whatever this may be. It may be a personal setback, it may be an insult, it may be any type of suffering. And I still experience that suffering, but I don't react to it in the same way. I don't multiply it, I don't magnify it. So I'm able to recognize that suffering for what it is. And so that is something we can maybe not quantify in terms of like having a percentage or a number, but we can look at our own experience. And we can see that when I exist in the world and when I deal with, difficult people or difficult situations, having practiced Buddhism or having studied the teachings and engaged in meditation practice for however long, are my reactions the same as they used to be? Is my mind calmer? Do I have more contentment? Am I thrown around by the ups and downs, this roller coaster of life, as as wildly as I used to be? And so that is the way we can gauge, and we can try to have some measure of how our practice is going. Does that help?
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, one more question. So the
Yeah.
examples that are here in this text, which some
Mm-hmm.
of it, you asked us to review after last class.
Mm-hmm.
So while reviewing those examples, I have a question. Are they, the
Mm-hmm.
examples that we see here, are they supposed to be taken exactly the way it is? Like, if you have this suffering, this was the cause, or this is in general meant to show you all the all the non-virtuous activities you could have done. So is it very specific and exact, or is it generic?
It's a little of both. I mean, in many ways, the teachings are very precise, but at the same time, and so these in the text is presented as very specific examples, right? With the
Right.
idea that since you have this specific example, you can look at a specific action you're doing, and that will cause a result. Um, but the truth is, when we look at karma generally we say there's four types of karmic results, right? So a complete karmic action can have up to four different types of results. And the first result would be what's called a throwing karma, or the result of a throwing karma. And that is determining which of the six realms of rebirth you take, right? That's your throwing karma, the result of a throwing karma. The other type of karma, in addition to throwing karma, is called completing karma, and that is what's determining different situations. In completing karma, there are three different types of results within that. One is environmental karma, so where you're born, how you're born, the situation you're born in. And then there's two types of completing karma that are similar to the cause. One is similar to the cause in effect, and one is similar to the cause in experience or in habit, right? And so when you engage in the act of killing, let's say, because that's the easiest one, and that's the first of the 10 non-virtues, the throwing karmic result of engaging in that would be to be reborn in a lower realm, generally a hell realm, we'd say. But then the environmental result, if you aren't born in a hell realm, if you experience the environmental result of killing, then that would be in a difficult environment, being in a country that is war torn, or being into a family that is in a feud, or something like this, right? That's the environment. And then the similar to the cause and habit, that result would mean it's very easy for you to engage in that same harmful activity over and over again, because you've developed the habit of killing, and therefore in this new life, it's easy for you to continue to engage in killing. In many ways, that's the most insidious of the types of karmic results, because it perpetuates the cycle of violence, or of karmic destruction. But here, what we're looking at is the last karmic result, and that is similar to the cause and effect. So in general, and again, this is in general, a karmic action or any action will have a result that is similar to it in its effect as a completing karmic result. So when you engage in an act that's physically causing harm to others, whether you're physically abusing them or killing them, generally you're going to have a result from that that involves you experiencing others engaging in harmful activity towards you, whether it be them killing you or torturing you or in some way engaging in violence towards you. And so we do see these specific relationships between specific types of behavior and then the specific family of results that can come from that behavior. So that those are what are being highlighted here. However, there are so many different karmic factors that are blossoming in any given moment that it's not to say there's a one to one 100% of the time. So there is room
Right.
for ambiguity. There's no room in the fact that a negative action is going to have a harmful result, a virtuous action is going to have a positive result. There's no negation for that, right? Karma is definite. But the specific type of harmful result, there is some wiggle room, okay? So it's not 100% in that regard. But in general, we see since one type of karmic result is being similar to its cause and effect, or an experience rather, similar to the cause and experience, because of that, we see certain families of types of suffering come from specific actions. And that's what's being taught here.
Okay. Thank you. That's
Okay.
very helpful.
Yeah.
And then I will
It's,
ask a follow-up question. Sorry.
yeah, sure, please.
Do you want to complete your thought first?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
From the examples, I think in this text, but also elsewhere, like the other FPMT texts that speak about karma and karmic results, it seems to me that multiple causes or multiple actions can have a similar result. Is that a correct understanding?
Yeah, there are multiple actions that can have similar results, but that's because most of the results we experience aren't really the result of one specific thing. It's multiple causes working together to create that result quite often, right? So, um, anyway, the short answer is yes. You know, that these are general families of results, like family, like you can think of it as a family result, a family type of results. So this like cascade or this constellation of results are all the common results of this specific action, but there is overlap, you know. So this is like a general guide, but there is definitely overlap. And also you have to think of like our experience of suffering or our experience of samsara, we tried to put it into like these discrete, neat boxes, but it's not really that way. So if I go out on the street and I get mugged and someone beats me up and steals my wallet, right? So I have so many different experiences in that one interaction. I have violence happening to me. I have theft happening from me. I have the feeling of not being safe anymore, maybe the feeling of distrust depending on the neighborhood I'm in, or all of these things, right? Those are different types of suffering that are happening simultaneously. I experience them in one moment as a certain specific suffering. But really, the experience of being physically abused, the experience of having my property stolen, the experiences of fear or distrust or lack of self confidence, those are different types of suffering that are just happening simultaneously. So you could say that those different types of suffering actually have somewhat different causes that are all ripening in the same time in this experience of me being mugged on the street, right? So in that way, um, there are multiple causes that can have similar families of results because they work in tandem. You know, so the action we say generally having possessions stolen from us is one of the results of stealing, as is being impoverished or having possessions that don't last for a long time and so forth. But I could have something stolen from me from my bedroom when I leave and my room is empty, or I can have it stolen from me and be beat up in the process. Like those are two different, like the act of having property taken from me would be the same, but the other events that occur around it would be different. And that is how you can have different karmic actions ripening in like clusters or in families to experience these different types of results. Does that help a little bit, maybe?
Yes, I think what I was asking was also the other way around, that I will give an example or a couple of examples to be specific. For example, if you look in the different teachings for what are the karmic causes or the actions that result in your experience of divorce, you will see at least two things listed. And one of them is sexual misconduct in the past. And second one is causing division or creating division, dividing people and their union. and those are two different actions, and the listed result is the same. And the same thing would be if you look for lack of success in business, you will see that it's, for example, it's a bunch of things, from lying and misleading others to all sorts of things can result that way.
Yeah. So then, I mean, then the short answer is yes. Like that one result can have different types of causes, and that's not contradictory. And so since we're ordinary beings and we're not Buddhas, we don't know what the specific cause of this action is, right? So that's what I was saying before a little bit, is that, like, so as you're saying, you experience a lack of success in business, and different teachings say, well, this could be the result of lying to other business partners in the past, or it could be the result of stealing from people, or it could be the result of this. Those different actions all can have the result of being unsuccessful in business. But as ordinary beings, we don't know which of them caused this specific experience of lack of success, right? And to some extent, I don't know, for me, it doesn't really matter a little bit, because we recognize that all of those are harmful activities, and all of those harmful activities can have this result. And the goal of knowing that knowledge now is it doesn't really do me any good to know that my experience in this moment of this specific suffering came from this specific action in the past. That doesn't really help me right now. What helps me now is recognizing the suffering is a result of my own actions, and then not engaging in the things that would cause it to happen again in the future. And if there are different possible causes for the suffering, then I don't want to engage in any of those causes. And that would be the fail-safe way to make sure this suffering doesn't happen in the future, right? And so being able to trace back the specific cause of this specific suffering, A, ordinary beings can't do it, or not even ordinary beings, sentient beings can't do it, only Buddhists can. But B, it's not super relevant, at least to me, you know? I think that it's like a distraction to some extent. And that's why having this kind of teaching, which shows us the relationship in general, that is more useful, because it reminds us of the types of consequences our actions can have. But any specific experience, knowing the cause of that, I mean, you already created that cause, right? So knowing the specific circumstances of that creation don't change the fact that you already did it. You know what I mean? But in short, yes. So there are different types of actions that can have similar or the same causes, as you mentioned. And I don't, that's not a contradiction. That's just how karma works, right? So,
Venerable,
yes,
sorry, are you continuing with something?
I was going to start going into the text, but you can ask a question. That's fine.
Okay. Slightly off on the Tonglen practice, there was this, you said, of course, there are different techniques and ways to do it. So one of the teachers actually, she starts the giving and taking, but she says it starts with your own self first. So suppose, for example, you're suffering. So you start firstly, actually taking in your own suffering first, then with your mind thinking that all this other suffering, and even when you're sending out healing or happiness, you're first sending it to yourself and then to others. Is that the okay way to do the practice?
That is, using that is that's perfectly appropriate, but that shouldn't be the heart of the practice. That's a way to help segue into a practice that's more focused on others and not on yourself. But sometimes having that is like the stepping stone into the practice. So it's definitely appropriate.
Okay.
But if all you're doing is taking your own suffering in that way, then you haven't gotten past your training wheels, essentially. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I thought it was slightly contradictory to self-cherishing, because, again, I'm doing the practice. Okay, the others happen to be there, but it's basically my own suffering and healing. So it is actually, isn't it contradictory to crushing my self-cherishing attitude? I don't know.
I don't think so. I don't think so insofar as we think of that technique as, like I said, it's like training wheels. You know, even the visualization involved of taking the suffering can be hard to do, right? And so anything we can use to facilitate an easier type of meditation practice, we're going to use. And for us, since our self-cherishing is so overpowering, our first instinct can be like, how can I possibly wish for others not to suffer? And how can I possibly take their suffering because I have so much of my own, right? That is like our default state of being, just as samsaric beings. And so that technique is a way to help overcome that like intellectual or emotional block to then develop a practice that isn't focused on yourself. So like I said, if that's the only practice you're doing, then it's not really embodying the full practice. But if you're using that as a stepping stone to then get yourself comfortable with both the visualization and the experience of willingly taking suffering into your body, like in an emotional way, then it's a very healthy way to segue into the practice.
I find it very powerful because I feel, I'm empowering myself so as to then, so I find it more powerful in that sense that it's kind of
Yeah, I
I'm
think it can be.
empowering my own body. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, it definitely
Thanks.
can be. I think especially when you begin your practice, if what Lama Zopa Rinpoche would always remind us is that it is incumbent upon us to make every single one of our activities be a spiritual activity. And we do that by having compassion and bodhicitta being the motivating forces for everything we do. No matter what we do, we can do it with compassion, you know? And so when you sit down to meditate, before you begin that practice, you develop the mind that says, I'm doing this, yes, to improve my life, but so I can be of service to others. I'm doing this with the wish that I can develop the techniques and the ability and the capacity that eventually I can help eliminate other suffering. And once that is your motivation, then your whole practice becomes a Mahayana practice, right? Even if the practice itself starts by looking at your own suffering, right? So we have to bring that mind, that motivation to everything we do. Whether it's filling out, Excel sheets at work, or whether it is, volunteering, or whether it is going to a Dharma teaching, or whatever it is, we have to have the mind that says, how can I do this in such a way that it is allowing me to develop techniques and the skills and the mental capacity to be of service to others? How can I do whatever this worldly activity is with compassion as the motivating factor, thereby transforming this worldly everyday activity into a spiritual practice, right? And so when you have your motivation strongly set, then you've got a little bit of wiggle room to do what you need to do to make the practice most efficient and effective.
Thank
Okay.
you, Ben.
Yeah. I see someone raising their hand. If you have a question, go ahead.
Geshe-la, on the fourth attribute, right, where there is a definite result of karma. Like it doesn't get lost. I think that's what I've understood.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I was wondering, where does purification practices like Vajrasattva or Samaya Vajra, so would that completely kind of like take away karma?
No, it's a good question. It's actually something we debate. You debate it in the courtyard, because when you're studying Madhyamaka and you study the 6th chapter, when you study Madhyamaka and you study the 3rd chapter of the Madhyamaka, which is dedicated to patience. What chapter is it? Yeah, the 3rd chapter. There is a very specific quote, and this is where we get it, and we also get it in the Bodhicharyavatara by Shantideva, that says anger destroys the roots of virtue, right? So we have this question of what does it mean to destroy the roots of virtue? So what is the root of virtue, and what does it mean to destroy it, quote unquote? And it goes the same way with purification, destroying negative karma. So it's something you debate. But the short answer is, once you've created a karmic action, karma itself only lasts a moment. We generally say karma is a type of mind. And in the Prasangika view, you can also have physical karma, but in general, karma is a type of mind. And then that mind, as soon as your action is done, that mind becomes an imprint, right? We say a bhaksha, or an imprint. So it's no longer a type of mind. It's no longer active. And so I think of it as a seed. Now, the language of karmic seed, different Buddhist philosophical systems define things differently. So in English, we have to be careful with our language. But once you engage in a karmic action, then the result of that is what I think of as a karmic seed. And as I said in the example, that karmic seed is, by engaging in actions of purification, it's like burning that seed. We can't get rid of the seed. We've already planted it, or we already have created the causes for that seed to be in our continuum. Okay? But we can make sure that seed doesn't have the capacity to develop. So when we engage in purification practices, we aren't like removing those karmic activities from our mental continuum, because we've already done those. We can't undo what we've done. We've created the imprints, but we can make sure those imprints have no capacity to actually flower into an experience of suffering or displeasure. And so that goes for both of them. So when we say we destroy the roots of virtue by engaging in anger, what that means is we destroy the capacity for those virtuous activities to result in positive results. And the same goes for when we destroy non-virtuous activities or non-virtuous karma through our actions of purification. What we're doing is we're not literally removing that karma because we already created it. We can't undo the creation of that karma, but we can neuter it. We can get rid of its capacity to grow into anything and to actually blossom into anything. Does that help? And it's true for both, but that's the important thing to remember. That is true for both, negative karma and virtuous karma. It's funny when you debate it, you have a big debate of like, there's a debate about mathematics essentially. So like if the being who engages in the act of anger is angry towards a being who has more spiritual realization than them, then this many eons worth of karma are destroyed. But if they have less number, a less spiritual realizations than them, then this much karma to destroyed. Or if they're ordained monk or nun, there's this much karma. But if they're not ordained, there's this much karma. And so there's this. We have a whole section that you debate. That's like the mathematics of how many virtuous seeds are destroyed, or how many eons worth of virtuous seeds. I don't remember, because for me, I don't think it's really that important. What's important for me is that we have no capacity as ordinary beings to recognize if those beings that we're engaging with are actually bodhisattvas or not. Like, I don't know. Bodhisattvas and Buddhas, for that matter, can take all different aspects. They take whatever aspect is most useful for students to develop. So it's very possible that all of you here are bodhisattvas or Buddhas that are only here to give me the capacity to engage in the act of teaching and develop some karma, right? That's possible. And so since we have no clue who is a bodhisattva or who is a Buddha, all we have is our worldly experience of them, and our worldly experience is wildly limited and confused. We have to engage, or we have to treat everyone as if they could be a bodhisattva. So to develop anger towards a bodhisattva is much more deleterious and damaging than to develop anger towards a non-bodhisattva. But I have no clue who a bodhisattva is and who isn't. And therefore I have to treat everyone like a bodhisattva and always have a mind that strives to never allow myself to have a moment of anger towards anyone, because it can be so damaging to myself and to them, more so to myself than to them, but to both. Okay, so last week we got through one verse only, but we'll get there again today. So last week we got through verse 9 and verse 10. And just to remind ourselves, 9 is the beginning of this section on karma. And it's in general. Verse 9 says, should the impulse arise now to seek our own pleasure, we must turn it aside to please others instead. For even if loved ones should rise up against us, we must blame our self-interest and feel it's our due. So here, this is introducing the whole section that is saying that we must recognize that it's our self-cherishing that is causing these experiences of suffering. And it's causing it because in two ways. It's causing it first because due to self-cherishing in the past, we engaged in harmful activities. Those harmful activities created negative karmic seeds that are now ripening as us experiencing suffering. That's the first way. And then secondly, our self-cherishing mind is doing everything it can to protect itself. So whenever our self-cherishing mind is threatened, let's say by someone insults us, or someone criticizes us, or someone takes something from us, our self-cherishing mind then lashes out and creates more immediate suffering in the moment, because it doesn't want those things to happen, because it wants me to be the center of the world, to have everything I want, to have nothing but pleasure and delight and joy and perfection and fame, right? So our self-cherishing is harming us in two ways. Our past self-cherishing is what caused us to engage in harmful activities, or it was one of the primary causes. And then our current self-cherishing mind is then taking that experience of suffering and magnifying it, multiplying it, making it even worse, right? So that's what this verse is reminding us, this first verse, as it introduces all of the more specific verses. When we recognize that it's our self-cherishing mind that serves as the cause for the harmful actions that we then that then have the results of the suffering experience of suffering, when we actually can realize that, right, then we can also realize that when others are engaging in harmful actions toward us, it's also because of their self-cherishing minds. It's one of the most important things we can do, and one of the most difficult things to do, is when others engage in harmful actions towards us or towards anyone, right? When we see people who are harmful, that are causing harm, even great, great harm in the world, to recognize that they're doing that because they want to be happy, they don't want to suffer, and they don't understand what actions will bring about happiness or bring about suffering. And they think that following their self-cherishing mind is going to bring about actual happiness. And so because of that, they engage in all sorts of harmful actions. And all they're doing is creating more and more suffering for themselves and for others. But more importantly, for themselves. Because you have to remember that, I don't think it comes up in this text, but one of the famous lines of mind training says that, and I'm paraphrasing, but the point is, until you destroy the real enemy, which is the self-cherishing mind, you could destroy thousands of external enemies and you'll never get rid of your suffering. Because the real suffering doesn't come from others causing us harm. It comes from the self-cherishing that creates the conditions for us to experience harm in the future. And so when there are people that are engaging in harmful actions, what we have to recognize is they're engaging in those harmful actions because of their self-cherishing mind. And as a result of that, they're creating more suffering for themselves in the future. The worst that an external enemy can do to me in this life is harm my body and take my life. That's the worst that can happen. But the worst my self-cherishing mind can do is plant the seed for countless eons of rebirths in lower realms, right? Which is far worse suffering than any suffering I might experience in this life. And so those people that are causing harm, what they're doing, yes, they're harming many people. They're harming individuals. They're causing ecological disaster. They're doing all of this harm. But the greater harm is the harm they're doing to themselves by planting seeds that can only ripen as them being reborn, not with a perfect human rebirth, but in a lower realm where their suffering is magnified and it lasts for eons. And so by recognizing this, it helps us develop compassion for those people who harm us, right? Which is critical. It's very easy to develop compassion for people we care about because that's our natural inclination. But developing compassion for all sentient beings is what we have to work to do. That includes those who would harm us. And so one of the ways to get to there, the baby steps it takes us to actually develop that compassion towards them, is by realizing that our own experiences of suffering come from our harmful actions, and our harmful actions come from our self-cherishing mind. And if the harmful actions we created or we engaged in this life and in past lives were due to the self-cherishing mind, then other people's harmful actions come from their self-cherishing minds as well. And so recognizing it in ourselves gives us the capacity, or makes it easier, for us to develop compassion towards others, even if they're engaging, and especially when they're engaging in harmful activities. Okay? And that's the most important time to have compassion, really. So with that as like the preface, let's actually try to go through some verses today. I don't know how many of you joined us last week, but in my head, the one thing about this text, at least this section of the text, it doesn't need a lot of commentary insofar as the words aren't confusing. And this translation's a little strange, actually, but in general, like you can get the meaning pretty easily. So I thought somehow that we would cover all 30 or 40 verses in our class last week, and we got through one verse only. And now we've gone through about 3/4 of the class today, and we have not even gotten to that verse yet. So clearly, I'm not very good at gauging time. So that's okay. We have plenty of time, though. So verse 10, we did cover briefly last week, right? Verse 10 says, when our bodies are aching and are racked with great torment of dreadful diseases that we cannot endure, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from the wrongs we have done. Till now we have injured the bodies of others. Hereafter, let's take on what sickness is theirs. So what this is doing is it's showing that our experience of physical suffering in this life is due to causing physical harm to others in the past. Now, that physical suffering can be the form of just sickness. It can be aches and pains. It can be violence that we experience at the hands of others. All of that type of physical suffering is the result of engaging in harmful actions related to others in the past and harming others in the past. And so knowing that and knowing what great discomfort that physical pain is giving us now, then that will encourage us to not engage in any sort of physical harm to others, right? Because we don't want to repeat this if we don't have to. I think, again, what is critical to understand about karma. So here, sorry, my mind is going different directions at once. Karma isn't passive. It doesn't give us the right to be passive. So I might experience sickness, but I also have the experience of being in a place where I have access to medical care. And those can both happen at the same time. So this verse is introducing the idea of Tonglin, right? At the end, saying, may I take that sickness from others. May I take on whatever sickness is theirs. That's not saying that if I develop a sickness, I shouldn't treat it. That if I have access to medicine or to physical therapy or to other therapeutic interventions, I should ignore them because this suffering of sickness is the result of a karmic action in the past, right? That's not what this is saying. If we have a conventional means to mediate our conventional physical suffering, we should take it, because that is also our karma, to have access to that. In the same way, it's our karma to have the capacity to help others who may be experiencing suffering, physical suffering, emotional suffering, right? So when you see someone suffering, the idea that that suffering is the result of their karma doesn't mean that you should not do something to help them. And in the same way, when we experience physical suffering, we aren't trying to glorify that suffering, okay? So we're recognizing that with that suffering, it has a cause. But if we have the means to mediate it, we should do so, because that's also a result of karmic actions, that we exist in a place and a time that we have the conditions that allow us access to healthcare of some sort. And the other thing to talk about with this verse, I don't know if it affects this audience that much, but you have a lot of people, especially in the Tibetan community, who would be like, well, this suffering, it's not actually my fault. It's spirit harm. There's some sort of spirit harm that's causing problems for me. That whether it be a possession or spirit harm or something. And therefore, instead of actually doing anything, I should just, do a puja to get rid of that spirit harm. That is also not a useful mindset. There are different types of external bad actors, let's say, that can be causing interference, be causing obstacles in our life. But we still have to take responsibility for our actions and for the results of those actions. I knew a monk who was doing really poorly in his studies, and he had a number of things going on, but one of the things was he just didn't study. Like, he didn't commit time to study, to memorization, to engaging in language practice, any of these things. He was always distracted doing other things. And then he did really poorly at debate, and he created this negative feedback loop of being really unhappy because he wasn't doing well, but he wasn't putting in the effort that was necessary for him to succeed. And instead of putting in the effort, he consulted different karasana, how do you say in English? People doing divinations. And someone did a divination that said, oh, you have this spirit harm. And therefore, if you do such and such a puja, that's what's important. And so once he decided he had some spirit harm, he said, it's not my fault. The fact that I never studied, that's not the reason that I'm doing poorly. The reason I'm doing poorly is because I had the spirit harm, right? And now it could be true that there was some external spirit harming him. I don't know. I can't see those things. But I do know he wasn't putting in any work to study, right? I could see that very clearly. And so you can't allow external factors to be an excuse. You have to recognize what obstacles you have, whether they're obstacles you can recognize in this life, or they're obstacles like harmful spirits that we don't have the capacity to see. Whatever, there may be obstacles, but we still have a responsibility to do our best with what we're given, and to take what opportunities are available to us, use them in the most efficient way possible, and take responsibility that our experience of suffering don't come from others. They come from our own past negative actions. Right? And that's true for physical suffering, mental suffering, all of these things. And again, the reason for this is to safeguard our future. The reason we recognize that our suffering now comes from negative karma is not to prevent that negative karma from ripening now, because it's already ripened, but it's instead to look at this experience of suffering I'm having right now, and saying, I don't want this in the future. So what steps do I have to take to prevent this from occurring in the future, right? So all of this work is to safeguard our future, to create the conditions that we have better access to the teachings, better access to realizations, have more time and place to practice in a meaningful way in the future, right? We can't prevent the karma that has already ripened. We can't stop it. It's already ripened. All we have to do is navigate it in a healthy way. Okay, so actually moving on from where we got last week. So that's verse 10. Now, verse 10, like I said, is covering or is talking about the suffering of the body. Verse 11 is looking at the suffering of the mind, so mental suffering. And verse 11 says, depressed and forlorn, when we feel mental anguish, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Until now, we have deeply disturbed the minds of others. Hereafter, let's take on this suffering ourselves. So here it's saying many of the different types of mental anguish we experience, whether that be depression or anxiety or any of these things, it comes from having caused mental anguish in others in the past, right? Having disturbed the minds of others in the past. Now, again, this isn't saying nothing arises without causes and conditions. So this isn't blaming someone for saying you're depressed, well, that's your own fault. That's not the point of this, right? It's possible that you have a chemical imbalance that's causing you to have depression or anxiety or any other type of mental disorder. But the way you experience that and the reason that is ripening in this life is due to you causing emotional harm to others in the past and disturbing the minds of others in the past. And we all know, how easy is it to fall into the habit when someone says something, maybe how easy is it to cause mental harm to others? To try to take people down their pedestals when you think they're being a little bit too showy, or there's someone you don't like and you know just the right comment that's going to make them feel bad about themselves. We know just the right response when someone says something to cut them down to size. We know all their weak points, especially people we care about. We know their weak points more than anything, right? How ingrained is that habit to snark back at someone, to try to harm them with our words? We all do this all the time, right? That we cause other people to be distressed. We cause emotional and mental distress on others. Now, sometimes we do it accidentally, right? When we do it accidentally, then we're not creating this karmic act, right? It's not a complete karmic action because there's no intention. Sometimes you say a thing and you can deeply upset someone, but that wasn't your intention at all. That happens, right? And so in that case, that action is not a complete karmic act. So if I say something with the best of intentions and it causes distress for you, then that's not going to have the same type of suffering result on my part because I didn't intend to distress you. But a lot of time we say things with the intent to distress people. And so if we think of all the different types of mental suffering, emotional suffering we have, here it says depression, being forlorn, sadness, mental anguish, but also anxiety, also any type of mental distress that we've experienced in this life, whether it be a small scale or a large scale. We know how debilitating that can be. And so because of that, we don't want to experience that in the future. But every time I go out of my way to cause someone else to feel bad about themselves, every time I cause someone to feel, to lose their sense of confidence, to be insecure, to just, feel bad about their appearance or their habits, every time I go out of my way to do that, to cause other people anguish, all I'm doing is planting the seeds to experience my own mental anguish in the future. And so since I can look at my life and see that I do engage in that harmful action, I don't mean to, but I do, because it's been a habit for so long. So now I can see this is the result of that habit. And so therefore I don't want this result. Therefore I'm going to do my best to not engage in this habit. I think, dealing with mental health issues and the Dharma is interesting. I don't think it's possible for us let me put it this way. I think the capacity of our minds is infinite, right? If we all have the capacity to become Buddhas, then, to be a Buddha means to have an omniscient mind. To have an omniscient mind means to understand all phenomena directly without any mediating factors simultaneously, So since we have that capacity, since our minds have infinite capacity, I think that we do our minds conceptually have the ability to overcome any type of mental health issue we're experiencing. But the truth is, most of us don't actually have the resources to do that, right? So I don't think we can meditate away our depression or our anxiety or any of these things. I think it can be a useful tool, but if we have experienced mental health providers that offer pharmaceutical intervention as being another way to help mediate our mental health disorders that we may have, then that is a very valid path we can take. And so I I see some people, especially New Age people that have interactions with Buddhism and with other religions that are focused on meditation, saying you should not ever take medicine for mental health disorders. You should meditate it away. And I think that's dangerous. I think that's really dangerous. I think that we need to use whatever resources we have available to us. And in the 21st century, we have pharmaceutical interventions that some of us rely on to make our lives, function, and others don't need them. So even though we can look at our experience of mental anguish and suffering and depression as a karmic result of actions we caused in the past. As I said, the fact that we're born in a time and place that has access to pharmaceutical intervention is also a karmic result that we should not ignore. I also think mental health issues, not to talk about them too much, but the way we experience them is wildly mediated by our environment. And what I'm thinking of is there was a book I read in 2010, or it was published in 2010. I didn't read it in 2010. That was written by an investigative journalist, and it's called Crazy Like Us, The Globalization of the American Psyche. And he looked at a number of different cases around the world where people experience different types of mental health disorders, but due to their environments, their experience of them is wildly different than the Western. And as Western culture colonizes the world, it changed how people experience mental health disorders. And so as an example, he talked about schizophrenia and unmedicated schizophrenia. And he looked at the results of unmedicated schizophrenia in America and also in Zanzibar. And in Zanzibar, there is a spiritual belief that people that have schizophrenia are possessed by demons. And somehow, unmedicated schizophrenia in Zanzibar had better long-term outcomes than unmedicated schizophrenia in America. And they believed it was because in America, we look at individuals as the result of our pathologies, right? So people that have mental health disorders are ostracized quite often, or they look to be the source or the blame for their mental health disorder. Whereas in Tanzania, they're saying this isn't your fault that you're experiencing this, and therefore there was no social ostracization for people that were experiencing it. And specifically with schizophrenia, having a strong social network of support helps prevent reoccurring flare-ups of schizophrenia, right? So the environment you're in and the way you culturally understand your experiences dictates, or at least plays a part in, how that suffering ripens. Why that is useful for me, there are other examples in the book, such as when there was the tsunami that caused a lot of pain, a lot of death in Sri Lanka. A lot of Western psychotherapists immediately went, because they said there's going to be a lot of people suffering PTSD, we have to go help them. And yet at that time in Sri Lanka, there was no actual concept of PTSD in the same way that American mental health providers understand PTSD. And so they actually brought the idea of PTSD to Sri Lanka and made people experience more suffering than they would have naturally, because they imported a whole type of suffering that wasn't native to the experience of the people that were living there. And the whole point of this is that to remember that our experience of suffering is malleable, right? And so we are defined to some extent by the cultures and the environments we're born in. But as we study the Dharma, then we can recognize that malleability. And by recognizing that malleability, we can do something about it. We can allow ourselves not to be overwhelmed by it, or at least we can work towards that, right? So that, I think, is important, that our experience of suffering, even mental health suffering, we can look in the worldly sense of our experience of mental disorders and mental anguish being mediated by environment, by culture. And if something as mundane as culture can mediate the experience of mental health suffering or mental distress, then definitely something like the Dharma can mediate it. And hopefully, our practice can ameliorate it to some extent, right? Okay. Let's try to get a few more verses done. Going on to verse 12. When hunger or violent thirst overwhelms us, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Until now, we have kept what we had without sharing. We have plundered and we have stolen and we have lured people on. Hereafter, let's take from them their hunger and thirst. So, of course, when we understand, I mean, how many of us have experienced hunger and thirst, right? And no one wants to experience that. And the truth is, for most of us, our experiences of hunger or thirst aren't real hunger or thirst. The body starts feeling hunger before it's actually hungry, if that makes sense. Because the body feels hunger in a way that it wants you to actually consume energy before it gets into a state of degradation. So only people who have really, had real nutritional deficits that haven't eaten enough food for days and days on end have experienced real hunger pains. Most of us, what we experience as hunger pains are very mild, right? But even that we don't want. Even that can be totally disruptive to our day. And so here it's saying that our experience of hunger and thirst as a human being has as its cause or potential causes for it taking from others, not sharing with others, and here luring people on. It means engaging in dissimulation or deceptive practices where it gives us the opportunity to take from others. So all of these things can have the result of our experience of hunger and thirst. What I think is useful to this is to remember that this is both, or it can be both, proscriptive and prescriptive. And what I mean by that is engaging in the act of stealing is going to have a potential result of hunger and thirst. So engaging in that non-virtue. So therefore we know not to engage in that non-virtue. But also not being generous, not engaging in generosity when we have the capacity to, can also result in a hunger and thirst, right? So the non-engaging in virtue can have deleterious results in the same way that the engaging in non-virtue. And so recognizing that, we have to recognize what resources we have and use them to the best of our ability, because our lack of action itself, when we have the means to act in a virtuous way, creates the conditions for us to experience suffering, right? So there's both prescriptive actions, these are the things we should be doing, and proscriptive, these are the things we should not be doing or we should avoid doing. And so this, at least this verse specifically, but in general, we have to recognize that our experience of suffering comes from both engaging in virtue, in non-virtue, but not engaging in virtue. And so therefore the remedy is not only to not engage in non-virtue, but also to actively seek out virtue, right? So we have this multiple, like a two-prong approach. Again, understanding that this type of suffering is the result of karma doesn't mean it's acceptable, okay? The whole reason we practice Dharma is because suffering should not be acceptable. Our suffering and other suffering, none of them should be acceptable. We shouldn't be content when we see any suffering, okay? There's nothing acceptable about suffering. What understanding karma does is it allows us to recognize something, but recognizing it doesn't mean we accept it, okay? Recognizing it gives us context. It doesn't make something appropriate. So there are a lot of teachings that talk about, I was reading a commentary just the other day that it seemed very out of the blue. My guess is this was a commentary that had been recorded. It was an oral commentary to a contemporary audience. My guess is this is an issue that had come up before because it seemed very random where it was in this commentary. My guess is earlier in another discourse, this had come up with his audience. But he said the fact that women get paid less for doing the same work as men is the result of their karma, right? And I've heard teachers say like things like that in audiences, and there's always the audience gets a little tense. But he answered. He's like, look, that doesn't mean it's acceptable. That doesn't mean it's appropriate. That doesn't mean it's behavior that we should endorse or encourage and not actively work to subvert. But it means that that is an uncommon type of suffering that they experience because they're born in a woman's body, and that is due to some karmic action in the past. And it's hard to say those things and not feel like you are accepting them just as the way it is. And he says, no, this doesn't mean we accept it. This doesn't mean we don't actively work to overturn or to overwhelm the system that causes that suffering, right? But it is recognizing that that uncommon suffering between a man and a woman in the job market is still karmically related. It isn't. It doesn't come from nothing, right? It isn't random. There's still karma that causes that experience of suffering. Doesn't mean we should accept it. We should never accept suffering. That goes on to say we should never accept injustice. We should never accept violence or oppression in any capacity when we have the means to do something about it, even the smallest means. But we can recognize, we can create context that allows us to understand it. Understanding it isn't the same thing as accepting it. So we see so many people struggling or suffering from food insecurity, right? Whether just due to the environment they live in, or if, like the people who live in Gaza, whose all of their resources have been destroyed due to the war, and are facing, a genocidal lack of resources and food insecurity. We look at that and we can say that experience of hunger is the ripening of karma, of them engaging in harmful actions in the past. Understanding that doesn't mean we accept it. It doesn't mean we don't do anything about it. Okay. So here we're looking at our own experiences of hunger and thirst, as meager as they may have been in this life, and recognizing that even that we don't want to experience again. And the causes for that, as is mentioned here, some of the causes for that are stealing from others, taking from others, leading others astray, bringing others towards non-virtue, not being generous with others, when we have the capacity to. And therefore, this text specifically is saying, okay, now that we recognize that, we see that karmic link between karmic action, or between action, karmic seed, and suffering result. Now that we see that, we'll take on other suffering that's in that same vein, right? In general, when you do Tonglen in a vague way. And what I mean by vague is you say, may I take on all their suffering, right? Here it's saying, first, you're going to do Tonglen that takes on the suffering of hunger and thirst. Then you're going to do Tonglen that takes on the suffering of disease and illness. Then you're going to do Tonglen that takes on the suffering of mental anguish and depression and anxiety. So it's saying, instead of having this vague idea, may I take on the suffering of all sentient beings and give them my happiness? No, you're going to list out the specific types of suffering. And all that does is it makes your meditation practice more robust, right? It makes your meditation practice more detailed, and it gives you more to grab onto. Now, for some people, that may not be the best way to practice. Some people may do better with an abstract idea. But for many of us, that abstract stays abstract. And having these specific examples, so you take your Tonglen practice and you make specific meditation parts of your practice where you're focusing on different types of suffering. For someone like me, whose mind is so scattershot and distracted all the time, who has no real ability to meditate in any meaningful way, having something specific like this gives me something to grab onto, right? So it makes me leap into the meditation with a greater sense of security. Okay, so we can use these examples to say, I've experienced hunger and thirst in this life. These are the causes of it. It wasn't due to a simple lack of food. It wasn't due to a lack of water. The lack of food and beverage came about because I engaged in this harmful activity. Therefore, not only will I not engage in that harmful activity again, because I don't want to continue experiencing hunger and thirst, I don't want to experience it in the future, but I will take the hunger and thirst of others. So it's very specific in that way. It allows your practice to be like fine-tuned, if you want to think of it that way. Okay, maybe we can get through one more verse. So verse 13 says, when we lack any freedom, but we must obey others. This is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from the wrongs we have done. Till now, we have looked down on those who were lowly. We use them as servants for our own selfish needs. Hereafter, let's offer our service to others with humble devotion of body and life. Now, this is showing that we have the experience of suffering of powerlessness, right? Imprisonment, exploitation. These are all things we've experienced in this life to one degree or another. And so this is saying these types of suffering, they came from our actions of exploiting others, of using others in ways that were inappropriate. You know, many people, especially when you deal with service workers, you think, well, they're being paid, therefore I don't have to treat them well. How often do you go to a restaurant and you see someone treating their waiter or waitstaff horribly? And they say, well, look, I'm paying for this service. Therefore, I'm not paying you for me to be nice to you. I'm paying for you to serve me. Therefore, I can treat you however I want. That's totally wrong, right? That's totally an awful way to go about dealing with people, you know? It may be true that you're paying someone for their labor, whatever that labor may be, whether they are waiting on you in a restaurant, whether they are cleaning your house, whether they're serving as personal attendants. You are paying someone for their labor. That doesn't give you a right to treat them with anything other than kindness and compassion, right? And yet we do that, you know. Maybe you don't, but we can definitely see examples of that. We think that my money, my power, my influence gives me a right to treat others however I want because I'm paying them, therefore they should take it. Or even worse, I'm not paying them enough. I'm underpaying them. You know, I'm not paying them fair wage. I'm engaging in like nefarious business practices that cheats people out of their money or out of the fruits of their own labor, right? I think right now in the world, we feel powerless. Like powerlessness and exploitation are really predominant feelings. I know I feel powerless all the time. Not powerless in the sense of being imprisoned and not powerless in the sense of being exploited, but powerless in the sense that I see so much wrong in the world and I don't know what I can do to help mediate it, right? How I can be effective. And that sense of powerlessness is definitely a lesser suffering than being imprisoned or being exploited, but it's still a discomfort, right? And what I like about this verse specifically is every verse here is talking how to bring this type of suffering into a Tonlin practice, but it's also saying, look, there are worldly things we can do. So let's offer our services to others with humble devotion of body and life. It's saying, yes, I'm going to bring this type of suffering into my Tonlin practice, but I'm also going to engage in worldly activities where I offer my body, my services, my help, anything I can do. I'm going to do that now as well. Instead of just taking, I'm going to give. Not only in my meditation practice, but in my real life. Now, that doesn't mean don't employ people to help you. If you know, especially in India, there are many people that have household servants, right? It doesn't mean don't employ them, but it means when you're employing someone for their labor, then treat them fairly and give them fair wage for their labor and treat them with the kindness that you would treat, you know, your dear family members. Assuming you have good relations with your family members. I guess that's not always given, but you know what I mean? So this is saying that I'm going to give away my possessions, my body, my health to help others in such a way that prevents the ability for me to exploit them or to steal from them or to cause that kind of capture of their labor in a meaningful way. So this verse reminds us that it's not just our Tonlin meditation practice, but it's also in the real world, in our everyday life, that we can engage in these activities of giving to others, giving worldly resources, giving time, giving our bodies in any way that we're able to, giving our volunteer hours, you know, even simple things, you know, spending time with others. When someone when we say giving away our body, there is the idea that a bodhisattva that's reached a certain level of realization could give away their life even without any regret, without any mind of distress. And the story we always hear is of in the Buddha when he, in a past life, he saw a tigress with 5 cubs, and she was so hungry she couldn't feed her cubs, and she was considering eating one of her cubs. And so he gave up his own life to feed this tigress so she wouldn't eat her cubs. and he did it with a happy heart, right? So that's the example we're kind of all aspiring to, is giving up our own life to feed an animal. Most of us can't do that. Most of us don't have that realization, that ability. We can't do that with a mind that's not filled with regret and anger and remorse. But we can give our body in other ways, which is to say, we can give our time, our energy, and our devotion. Sometimes if you have friends or family members who are distressed, just going out to coffee with them, just spending time with them, is giving your body to them in a meaningful way, because it's giving them your time, it's giving them your attention. Okay, so we can give our body not in the extreme way that is like the paradigmatic example of giving away our body, but there are ways we can do that given our resources, our means, and our levels of realization in this life. The other thing I think important about this verse is, at least for me, it forces me to think about the idea of, what do I mean by power, right? So when we say we have a lack of freedom, we have to obey others, then that's saying that I am powerless when I've experienced powerlessness. And I think that we're taught, at least in our culture, like 21st century modern culture, that power comes from violence and from might, right? Might makes right is this idea. And I think that's a very paltry, feeble idea of power. I think that's like a coward's definition of what it means to be powerful. To be physically strong and destructive and violent does not, for me, give the experience of power. It gives the experience of fear. And so when I think that of power and powerlessness, this is a good opportunity for me personally to reflect on, what do I mean by being powerless? And maybe I'm not as powerless as I think. Maybe I have the power not to, change my immediate circumstances, but I do have the power to change how I react to them. I have the power to change how much of my emotional and mental labor I give towards my suffering, and how much I don't. How much of my emotional labor and my mental labor I put towards my happiness. And by putting it towards my happiness, that means putting it towards others' happiness as well. That's something I have power over. There are stories that came out of after the Chinese occupation of Tibet in 1959. There are people that escaped prisons, and I've heard a number of monks talk. And there's one monk specifically who talked about the fact that, yes, he was tortured and he was treated really poorly, but his cell had enough space for him to prostrate. And so every day he would do prostrations and he'd feel great joy. He didn't have the ability to control his external circumstances at that point, but he did have the ability to not let those external circumstances take away his capacity to feel joy. And the fact that he had enough space to make prostrations was all he needed to experience joy. Doesn't mean he didn't have physical suffering, and doesn't mean he didn't have emotional anguish as a result of that physical suffering and what was happening to his country. But it meant that he didn't allow that violent and physical sense of powerlessness to control his own power over his emotions, right? So he was the powerful one in that relationship. As he was being abused by guards, he did not feel powerless. He felt like he didn't have mobility, he didn't have autonomy, but he wasn't powerless because he still controlled his mind. And the problem is, we are powerless because we don't control our minds. We allow our minds to go under the control of our delusions, of our raging emotions, right? So we have willingly walked into powerlessness by allowing our negative minds to take control. And so therefore, if we want to not be powerless, if we want to have a sense of independence and strength, the way we do that is by conquering our deluded minds. That's how we regain power, right? Okay, I think I'm going to end there because it is 7. So are there any questions, anything we want to talk about these verses that I've gone over this week, or anything else? I don't know if you can hear behind me, but I have a puppy who is running around in circles, and his nails are like tap dancing on the floor because he also is anxious to leave, apparently. But that's okay. He can wait a few more minutes. Okay, if there are no questions, um, I guess we're going through this text a lot more slowly than I had anticipated, but we got through verse 13 today, and we'll continue next week. Next week, I will be at the center in person. So anyone that's in Bangalore or able, we encourage you to come to the center to be with us in person, but also the online option will be available. It's always a hybrid teaching when we can. So with that, I'll say thank you for spending time with me
I
today.
just want,
I appreciate.
hi.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
Sorry. I just want to ask one question.
yeah, please.
Yeah. So, so we come across various situations in life and difficult situations. So we need to use these situations to transform us. Is it like we need to see the situation as an opportunity to transform and conquer the situation by not reacting, or based on the situation, we need to be how to be wise in the situation. Do we need to use as many as is it?
The short answer is yes. The earlier verses that we went over previously, that we didn't go over today, are teaching us and discussing how we take the difficulties of this life and we allow them to fuel our practice. So when we experience suffering in this life, instead of letting that overwhelm us, we allow that suffering to become the fuel that pushes us forward onto the path of a bodhisattva and towards Buddhahood. So when we experience difficulties in this life, whatever they may be, small difficulties, big difficulties, instead of letting those overwhelm us, what we have to do is use that opportunity, that experience of suffering, to say, I'm experiencing suffering now for these reasons, and therefore I'm going to allow that to fuel my engagement, my practice. So there are multiple ways to do it. One is like we've been saying, when you have a greater control over your mind, then you can recognize that suffering, but it doesn't cause the same level of mental or emotional distress. So you don't multiply that suffering. So that's the first thing. In the moment, as we tame our mind and as we recognize where suffering comes from and our own ability to be the one that is the arbitrator of our experiences of joy and our experiences of suffering. Once we recognize that in a meaningful way, then even though we may experience the conditions that cause physical distress or pain or emotional suffering, we have the tools to not let ourselves be overwhelmed by it. So that's the first thing. And then the next thing is, as we've been talking about today, is that when we have that experience, then we reflect, where did that experience come from? What are the causes that I have participated in the past to cause that experience to ripen? And how can I actively prevent engaging in those causes so I don't plant any more seeds that'll ripen into this experience of suffering in the future? So what the text and the tradition teaches us is a way first to help mediate our experience of suffering now, our immediate experience of suffering now. And the best way we do that is by controlling our mind, learning to control our mind. And that involves learning how to understand the context for our suffering, right? Understanding that our suffering isn't random and doesn't come from outside of us. Understanding all of that gives us a greater ability to control our mind, control our emotions, control our delusions. That prevents our experiences of suffering now from compounding. And then we also prevent future suffering by engaging in the practice that will not allow them to ripen or not plant seeds of them. So it's doing both, helping to mediate our present experience of suffering and prevent our future experience of suffering.
Yes, thank you.
Is that okay? Yeah.
But I hope this will come in practice, because, for example, if suddenly someone comes to us and react it in different way, this happens in a fraction of a second, and we have to react it back. So by default, our nature is to react it back, right? Or go for the fight or go for an argument. But
Yeah.
we don't have time to apply our knowledge, apply how to be wise in that situation. So this will come in
Yeah.
practice.
It does come in practice. So when we talk about meditation, right, the Tibetan word for meditation is to make something familiar. So when we meditate, what we're doing is becoming familiar with our minds. And so when we engage in this practice of meditation over and over again, we're making these virtuous minds and these reactions inseparable from our minds. So at first, what's going to happen is when you study this material or even study any kind of dharmic material about how the delusions work, you won't notice when you're engaging in harmful action. But maybe at the end of the day, you say, oh, when I responded, my first instinct was to respond out of anger, right? So at first, you only notice it after the fact and after it's already too late to do something. So that's where we are right now, is that we notice it after the fact. But then the more you practice, then you might notice it quicker. So you might respond briefly with anger, but then you recognize that and you can take a step back. And then you might recognize that anger before you say anything. So you have that experience of anger or whatever it may be, but then before you act on it, you recognize it. And then eventually you will hopefully achieve a state where that anger doesn't any longer even become the default reaction. So it's a matter of baby steps, right? So at first, it's just recognizing how our deluded minds are causing us to engage in activities of our non-virtuous activities and to multiply our suffering. So just recognizing that, being able to look at our day and say, what did I do today? And were my actions guided by a spiritual practice, or were they guided by the self-cherishing mind? Were they guided from the three poisons of attachment and anger and delusion? So just being able to look through our day and notice it after the fact, that's step one. And then slowly, 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 we get faster. Our reaction time becomes faster because our mind gets more inseparable from virtue. But it's not an immediate practice. It builds up in time.
Thank you.
Okay? Yeah. Anything else? Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, yes, please.
While I know the bookish definition of nirvana, and nirvana is a term that is used in general, but can it differ from like person to person, or like I mean society to society, or like what it actually means for someone may be something for else? Is it like does the definition hold same for like every place, everyone? Or is it like just a meaning that a person makes, or is it like something general?
So nirvana has a very specific definition in our tradition of Buddhism, and nirvana, also moksha, are both the same, and that is liberation from samsara. So to achieve nirvana, it means you have eliminated all of the deluded minds, as well as the seeds of the deluded minds. But you have not eliminated the dualistic appearance, where things still appear to you in a way that they don't actually exist, right? Only a Buddha eliminates those. But so when you've actually understood the nature of reality, you've what we say is emptiness, right? You have direct realization of the nature of reality and meditated on that in such a way that it has uprooted not only your deluded minds, but also the seeds of the deluded minds. Then you progress along the paths, and that is what it means to achieve nirvana. So once you've achieved nirvana, you're no longer subject to the whims of karma and delusion, because you have exhausted all of your negative karma. You're not creating any more negative karma because you don't have any deluded minds, right? And so that's what it means to be free from samsara, to be an arhat, we'd say. So to achieve nirvana or moksha means you have become an arhat. You're totally free from samsara and the sufferings of samsara. The distinction between that and the Buddha is you haven't accumulated enough merit to allow you omniscience, and you haven't accumulated enough merit that allows you to not still see things as dualistic in a way. You don't act on that dualistic appearance, but you still experience it. Now, we could say we have moments in our life that are like moments of liberation, that are like moments of nirvana, moments when we feel like we actually are free of suffering, we've achieved some level of realization, whether it be in meditative equipoise or whether it be happening through other circumstances in our life. So we might have brief glimpses of that, right? Just a taste of it. That's possible, but that's not actual nirvana. So actual nirvana looks the same across all sentient beings. To achieve nirvana, to achieve moksha, is to eliminate all the sufferings of samsara, as well as the seeds of the sufferings of samsara, to cut out the root of samsara, which the actual root of samsara is the mind that grasps at the self as if it were real. So to eliminate that, and all the seeds of that deluded mind, is to be to achieve nirvana. Okay.
One more question I have, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
What is the state in which a person is not impacted by like things happening in the surrounding? As you explained, like no matter what is happening, you you have control
Mm.
over your mind. What is the state called as, like, once someone reaches that state, like, what do we call them?
Mm. I mean, there are a number of different like stages of practice and of realization. So there could be different ones. But even ordinary beings who haven't realized the nature of reality yet, ordinary beings like you and me, we can meditate and practice and gain a level of insight that allows us not to be immediately reactive, or not to have like a hair trigger to all of our immediate experiences. And so there are different names and there are different titles that people might achieve as they practice the path, but those are all just placeholders to show what level of realization they've achieved, and to find a level of contentment that isn't dependent on external validation, but is only dependent on internal validation. That's something we can achieve. Ultimately, achieving freedom from samsara um, is to achieve nirvana, is to become an arhat. So you get that title of being an arhat when you're actually free from samsara. But even far before we achieve that level of realization, we're able to develop a mind that is stable and is not disrupted by our everyday ups and downs of samsara. And some of those levels have names and some don't. So we would just say like a realized practitioner, is able to develop a mind of contentment that is non-reactive to external conditions, but only reactive to internal conditions. But there's no title, unfortunately. There are a number of different stages that have titles, but in general, for what you're describing, there isn't a single title.
Understood.
Yeah.
I mean, I do have like so many questions going on, but yeah, I understand, like, they'll solve themselves over time.
Yeah.
I do want to like talk in length, to be honest, like with someone like about these things, and like just
Mm.
keep talking about it until I get answers to my all questions. But I
Yeah.
understand like
Well,
the time is limited
well,
and all those things.
I mean, I've had opportunities to sit for hours asking my teachers, and sometimes I just end up with more questions. So it's good to get our answers sometimes in little pieces, and then go home and think about them and spend time meditating on them, and that will inform even more questions, right? Because the truth is, um, our teachers can't give us their realizations. They can answer our questions, but we still have to do the inner work to understand their answers, right? So I could say all the right words right now. It doesn't mean that they'd be understood by everyone. Because to understand them, you have to actually reflect on them. Whenever we try to develop new knowledge, we say that we go through the process of both first study and then contemplation and then meditation. So study is to hear something new, to engage in the actual consumption of new knowledge, right? The word we use in Tibetan and Sanskrit is to hear it, because traditionally you would study by the oral tradition, right? But so first we learn new knowledge through study, but then we have to actually contemplate it. So no matter what answers I give today, you have to then think, does this answer make sense? Does this answer leave me with more questions, or does it help satisfy my doubt? And does this answer feel valid to me? What are the reasonings that were given for this answer? Do I have any doubts about it? So you actively think about whatever new knowledge you've acquired. And then once you've engaged in that act of contemplation, and you have some confidence, then you actually bring it into your meditation practice. So your mind is more familiar with that answer. And then you can develop an understanding of it or a realization of it. So getting information is only the first step, right? But we have to constantly be studying, contemplating, and then meditating on everything we learn. And that's how we integrate our intellect and our emotional experience, and to make it all as one experience.
Yes. Thanks a lot for answering my question. I have one last question that I want to ask, which is
Okay.
like very difficult for me to understand. A lot of times I feel like my mind already knows like what is gonna happen, and I feel like sometimes it gives clues. I mean, I'll give you an example. So, say randomly, I'm gonna watch a movie, let's say tomorrow. So
Mm.
the words or the title that movie has, sometimes I see it like beforehand, and even I don't want to consciously concentrate on it, but unconsciously I do concentrate. I get these words beforehand, like 1 day ago or two
Mm.
days ago. And when I actually watch that movie, I can relate that, okay, 2 days ago I did
Mm-hmm.
notice something like this. I mean,
Yeah.
what kind of a thing is this? Like, does mind already know what is going to happen in future? Does
Well,
mind
we'd
already
say
have
most,
prepared itself?
in general, we'd say our mind, we can't predict the future, but depending on our experiences, we can notice habits, we can notice trends, and we can have a level of awareness that may be above, or rather running below what we're consciously aware of, right? So, for someone who, if you, for instance, I read a lot of novels, and there's a good chance that I read a novel, and before I'm halfway through, I know how it's going to end because I've read so many novels that I've seen the patterns that storytellers tell, right? So then when I get to the ending, I feel like I already knew what was going to happen, even though I hadn't seen those words, but because I've seen the patterns occur over and over again. So we become familiar with patterns, we develop habits, and we have levels of awareness that sometimes we aren't cognizant of, and all of those things work together sometimes to give this sense of deja vu, the sense of knowing something that we don't know how we knew. So there is that. Now, arguably, we do say that we may have learned something in a past life, and then that something may happen in this life to cause that to ripen. So we may be able to experience things or understand things very easily and very quickly, that even without putting a lot of effort in this life, because we may have studied them in the past and developed levels of realization that just need to be activated. Now, that doesn't really work when we're talking about pop culture and we're talking about movies, but sometimes we can come to understand things quite easily due to already having practiced it in the past, in the past rather. And that doesn't happen often that we're cognizant of that, but when we do realize it, it should be encouraging us that my practice now is not being wasted. Everything I realize now, it's like putting it in the bank, and that in future lives, my ability to understand this will be even easier because I'm doing work now that is creating the habit or the familiarity with this material, with this spiritual path, and therefore in the future, when I continue studying it in future lives as well, I have already built up a level of familiarity that makes it easier, right? So there are a couple of different things in that realm, but mostly it's us, our ability to recognize patterns and to develop habits regarding those patterns, I think.
But is it
Oh,
is it right? Is it right? That's what I want to understand. Because if I give a lot of credit to my mind, the mind might take control over me, kind of like as you have said, like we shouldn't let our deluded mind let's take control over
mm,
ourselves, because it has happened with me before. When I give a lot of credit to my mind, it starts steering my life. It start acting like a boss, basically. Like, okay, I'm the boss. I know what I'm doing. So I don't want to give it that, and that's why I ignore all these signs,
yeah.
subtle signs, whatever
Well, then
patterns
I
that I
think
see.
Yeah, I think then you kind of have your answer is that if you have the feeling of powerlessness, that you have like given over your power to another experience, then that's not beneficial. So instead, you need to, whenever you have those moments, instead of giving over to them, recognize that they're happening and say, where is this coming from? Is this benefiting me or is this not benefiting me? And if it's beneficial to you and to others, then you can pursue it. But if it's not beneficial, then you develop techniques to not allow it to overwhelm your life and your experience. So you have to analyze, is this helping me or not? And is this leading me down a spiritual path or down a worldly path? And if it is causing somehow to benefit my spiritual practice, then I can encourage it. And if it's not causing that, if it's causing me some sort of distress, then I learn to recognize it and then put it down and not follow it mindlessly, you know?
Understood, understood. Thank you very much
Okay.
for answering my question.
No problem. Okay, so let's call it there for evening. Thank you for asking questions. Thank you for coming. I appreciate all of you. And let's just remember that any actions we've done today through our study and through our discussion have accumulated some sort of merit for us. And then instead of keeping that merit for ourselves, let's develop the wish that we might give that merit away, that that merit may ripen on others, that they might experience freedom from suffering, that they might experience happiness, they might experience joy. And might that merit, put us in the fast lane to Buddhahood, that we might quickly experience Buddhahood to give us the maximum capacity to be of service to others. And so we dedicate our merit in that way. Instead of keeping it for our own immediate happiness, we dedicate it towards the happiness of others and towards our future Buddhahood, which will allow us to be of greatest benefit to others. And so we'll offer brief dedication prayers. I do not have the FPMT prayers on me, but that's okay. We'll offer these prayers. This is a different translation of the prayers, so we'll do these in English. Through this virtue may I swiftly, having gained Guru Buddha state, place each and every sentient being without exception in that state. Precious supreme Bodhi mind, may it where unborn arise, and where born never decline, but increase forevermore. Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Venerable.
Thank you.
everyone for joining us.
Thank you.